The Loomies, the only place that Loomis is everywhere. Wow, Loomis's favorite books. Wow. It's only going to be a normal video. Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. And yes, from that very fancy, very hoity-toity intro, this is the first inaugural Loomies. And what is that? That's just I'm just counting down my favorites of the year. Always, every single time I've tried to do this before, I always run out of steam. So, like, before I've done, like, top 10 trash, I've been top 10 this, I've been top 10 that, and then always, by the end, I never get to all the top 10s that I intend to get to. So, I've kind of done what, like, most people do. I kind of ripped most of this off from Kelsey from Slime and Slashers. But some kind of, like, end-of-the-year thing where I round up all of my opinions and get into them. So I'm going to have a bunch of categories, and I'm going to have 3 things that are in each category for the most part. I try not to overdo multiple things, but if a book has a certain element that is also relevant, but in a way that I haven't talked about before, then yeah, I'm going to still include it there, like audiobooks and then reviewing them as books. Those are 2 different things, you know, that type of thing. You kind of get where we're going as we go. So first off, my favorite new authors. So these are authors that were new to me and I absolutely adored. So first off, Cameron Johnson. I love this author. I just discovered them randomly. I was reading this, there's like this website called Grimdark Magazine, also a magazine, but they were talking about all of their favorite one-off Grimdark books, and I was looking for some stuff to read when I was doing like a Patreon event, and I came across this author because I came across the Maleficent 7. And then I read that book and I really, really liked it. And then I go on NetGalley and I saw that they have a new book coming out called The Last Shield. So I got that. And then I really, really liked that. So I am willing to go any journey with Cameron Johnson because he is just an awesome writer. And I really like his style and I really like his characters. So I am in. Next up is Sarah Rees Brennan. And now this is the author of Long Live Evil. I've only read Long Live Evil by her, but I absolutely love it. We will definitely be talking about that book later on. But she manages to take some tropes that I normally don't like in fiction and completely turn them upside their head and write a really fantastic book. And I will always respect an author that can come in and change my opinion about a certain trope or something that maybe in the past I've not been a huge fan of. And finally, last but certainly not least, these are not in any ranking. I love all of these authors, but Kimberly Lemming. I loved so much this year when I read That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. I thought it was a fantastic book. So fun, so funny, and had like a really fun story. Like it was one of those things where it's like a very like quirky romance, and the characters kind of have a little bit more modern seeming speaking to them, but like the actual world building was also really well done. So it had this awesome romance at the center with this banter between these 2 characters, but the central idea of the world that they are in and how it works was really, really fascinating and turned a lot of ideas on its head. One of the things I like most about modern fantasy is that it's always kind of tackling and trying to dive into the elements of fantasy that normally don't get as delved into when it comes to classical fantasy, as to like what's good, what's evil, what is the moral relativism of all of that, and what systems are being used to oppress us and telling us that something is bad when really it's not that bad at all. So yeah, I really, really like this author's writing, and she's also hilarious. Like the book was really, really funny. Which, good romance, good story, and really funny. I'll follow you. I'll follow you anywhere, Kimberly. Best new series. So these are 3 series that I started this year that I absolutely loved. Some I've got into quite a bit, others not so much. First off, Route 666. Now this is from the Dark Future timeline. Not the timeline. It's from the Dark Future book series, and this is the only one from that series that I've read so far. It was a short story collection, and I really, really liked it. It had this very Mad Max, while also having some, like, occult elements to it, and it was just really, really interesting. Dark Future is a series that I really bought all of the books this year. I'm glad when I finally got to them, I liked them, because before I only owned the Comeback Tour, which is the one with Elvis Presley with like a gun, but there was so much more to the series, and you know, it was based off of a tabletop game. It was done by the original Games Workshop Press before they became the Black Library. GW Books was what it was called, and I got a whole bunch of those, and I really, really like what I explored, and I cannot wait to get into more because now I have them all. Next up is Age of the Undead by C.L. Warner. Now this is a book in the Zombicide series, which is apparently a board game. I've never played the board game. I got an arc for the final book in the series, so I was like, oh, I better go and listen to the other 2 books in the series so I know where I'm at. And I adored this series. I thought, like, it was so well told, and it was such, like, a fun fantasy, but with zombies tale, and I was really, really invested into the characters as you go through the story, and what it really is interesting as you go on, because I read all 3 books that are so far in the series, and I had a really big emotional reaction to the 3rd one, and C.L. Warner does some really interesting things with writing style, where he gives a character an arc, and then he also shows in later books how easy it is to fall back into familiar rotes of thinking when you're outside of where you got your arc from. So, like, there is this witch hunter who has a very narrow view of the world because she just is there to kill witches, you know what I mean? And she is not somebody who has a very, you know, well-rounded worldview. And through the first 2 books, she really starts to kind of question her beliefs and change as a person and become better. And then once she finds herself again in a scenario where she has to, you know, actively address her issues, but now she's with her peers, you know, you see a little bit of her kind of backsliding a little bit. And I thought that was a really interesting thing, and I thought that was one of the strengths of the series, is that it has great characters, and it shows that an arc, especially if you're looking at it realistically, is not just this. It's going up and down and up and down and up and down. Self-improvement is a constant journey. And of course, the entire series is just fun as well. But I thought it had really, really good character writing. And last, but certainly not least, is the Dragonlance series. I read one of the Dragonlance villains novels this year, and I thought it was so much fun that I went in a deep dive and bought a whole bunch of books from the Dragonlance series, and everything that I've been reading, I have been loving. I think it's a really fun fantasy universe, and it is really, really cool, and I am just about finished the final book in that original Dragonlance trilogy, and I'm really excited to get to that because, yeah, it's been a blast so far. Next up is Best Action Scene. Now, there are a lot of action scenes in the books I read, because I read, you know, a lot of Warhammer Fantasy, and a lot of medieval fantasy as well. And my favorites will definitely reflect my reading habits. So first off, I was just talking about the Age of Undead series. The second book, The Isle of the Undead, has an amazing dragon fight. There is this awesome duel between the party that you're following and this dragon, and it's on the ship, and like every character has their own things to contribute during this fight, and it's just so well told and really, really kind of like breakneck pace, and you're like, whoa, my god, this is like so cool. And it was like the best dragon fight I've ever read. It was so good. Next up is from the On the Soldiers of Giants novella by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And honestly, this is like every single action sequence in this. It is so well done. So it is it's about this character who is a disabled character in a fantasy world, and he is a really good sniper, and he befriends this ogre named Slobda, who is amazing. I love her. And he is basically like on a nest that's like, she walks, because she's so tall, she has like she carries on a mast on her back, and he sits in the little roost, and he gets like a bird's eye view of the battle and like gets in. He's like a sniper while she is in there pounding, going ham. And this book is so much fun because their relationship is so good. And one of the things that it's a novella, it's not a full book, but and one of the things I found especially captivating was the action sequences, and it was so breakneck because you have her fighting like in this physical, very upfront battle while he is trying to like take out some snipers that are like throughout the field, and like he has like this specific like nemesis sniper that like there's like a few run-ins with, and it's like always like breakneck and like super scary whenever it happens because like even if it misses, it like at one point like the sniper bullet like hits his nest and like breaks off the railing and he falls out of the crow's nest that he has built, and Slobda has to like rescue him while she's like fighting all these rats, and it's like wild and amazing. It's such good writing. I absolutely loved it. And then the one that has an actual like an animated thing on YouTube is the very final, well, not the final fight, one of the final fights in the book Echoes of Eternity by Aaron Dembski Bowden. This is right near the end of the Siege of Terra line and is basically the end cap, one of the end caps for many characters in a book series that had been going on for about 60 books. So there is a lot going on here, and this is the fight between Sanguinius, the Great Angel, and Angron, the Angel of the Red Sands. And like it is a amazing fight because it has been a battle where these two characters have, kind of encountered each other earlier in the series, and they've had a little bit of a bout here and there, but this is their big battle because this is like the final stand before, the end game of the series. And the action is so well told. These two characters are larger than life, and they're like fighting over this gigantic battlefield, and they're like clashing in the air. And, there's so many unique elements. Like at one point they're like fighting and they go fly right through this giant titan, which is, these god machines in Warhammer 40,000, and they like go right through that as they're fighting. And at one point like they're flying through the air, and like Angron is this giant unwieldy demon, and Sanguinius is like this like kind of like very agile angel looking character. And like at one point there's like there's like a gunship, and Sanguinius like avoids the gunship because he's like he doesn't want to kill the people, but like Angron does not have the maneuverability, so he just like flies through it, and like it's so fun. It's just so good. And I will share the animatic because like when you watch the animatic that someone like a fan made animatic that someone made along with a great audiobook narration that they like pair it with, it's like so cool to watch. So yeah, that one was an awesome fight scene. Best kill. So I'm not going to spoil a lot with these and go through them pretty quick, but for Dweller by Jeff Strand, every single kill that happens in Dweller is emotionally devastating because Dweller is a very slow-paced horror book, and it is not very in your face. And, you don't really get like a giant rampage. You get a pretty like in-depth exploration of a person's life as they age and as they get older and as they change, with interspersed with very, very graphic kills. And they sometimes they come out of nowhere. Sometimes you're expecting it and it's coming, and it gets even more like heart palpitating. And it is a fascinating book. One of the best books I read all year, and such an amazing character study. But every single kill in that book is very impactful. Next up is from the book A Dynasty of Monsters. Now this is a Warhammer fantasy novel, Age of Sigmar, and this one is like, so there is there's this giant rampaging horde of beastmen. Basically like they all got like big old ram's head, and they're like they're beastie dudes, and they're like big ripped, and they're rampaging throughout this countryside. So this group of humans are going to be overwhelmed and cannot take on this threat that's coming at them. This giant herd that's coming right for them. So they have to get help from the local vampires, and they are obviously not super thrilled about it. So their plan is to, join forces with the vampires and have this giant fight and save their city, but also, get a meaningful connection with these creatures that have lived in their land, and they've both been persecuting each other because, obviously the vampires are feeding on them, and they're also, killing every vampire that they see. It's like, it's how the society works. But there's a faction in the humans that do not want them to, like, team up with the vampires. So they basically, behind the scenes, they make it so that their army will not be there when the vampires have to fight the beastmen. So they have it so that their army shows up late to the battle. And when they finally show up, they're basically what the people who were doing the behind the scenes as the humans basically wanted the two forces to basically like wipe each other out, and then when their fully fledged army comes in, they can just clean out all of the monsters from their land, and the humans can live in supremacy and not have to worry about these various factions. They can just set both their enemies against each other and then clean it up. What happens is, when the army gets there, and this is where the kill comes in, is that this entire army of beastmen has been slaughtered by the vampires. And like literally one of the big vampire, her name is Lucavai, and she has this power to make it like rain blood. So there is legitimately just like a river of blood where like all these vampires are like feasting on these like goat dudes, and like Lucavai is like flying in the air feasting upon their leader, and the humans show up, and it's just like, oh no, because they fucked them over. And the vampires, they were not as defeated as you would have thought when it came there. And like it was just this visual of this full army being like, oh, we done fucked up. Because it's just like the vampires just like flying in the air being like, oh, you finally show your faces then, do you? We just did all the hard work. And then, yeah, it just goes crazy. But I just love the scene where they come across all of the slaughter of this entire army, and just the image of like, just like waist deep rivers of blood everywhere as they had like slain all of them. It was such a cool visual and had such a cool vibe to it that I just loved it. So definitely recommend a Dynasty of Monsters because it has some awesome scenes. And then this is a bit of a cheat. I know that like most of my kills have kind of been cheats so far, but also all of the novella Candy Cane kills again. It's really hard to pick a favorite kill. Brian McCallie goes ham on those kills. It is like a slasher to the nth degree that has some amazing kills in it. So I don't want to choose a single one. I just want to say they're all wonderful. Wonderfully horrible. It feels weird to be like, rare, them wonderful kills, but whatever. Speaking of novellas, here are my top 3 novellas. So Tusks of Extinction, got this as an arc, found this really compelling. It is a sci-fi about, far in the future. Basically, they are trying to bring back woolly mammoths, and they have the consciousness of the last person who was in charge of elephant preservation before she died from a poacher, and then all the elephants went away. So they're trying to reintroduce the woolly mammoths back, and they put her consciousness into the brain of a woolly mammoth, and she's going to teach them how to elephant and how to survive and how to be like they are supposed to be out of captivity. And it's such a compelling story because it's all about like her view of the world as a mammoth, but was also a human. And then it's like all about these other characters who are going into the preserve and how they are interacting with the world. It's just really, really well done and really, really well told story. Scan Lines by Todd Kessling. That's my review. It is very much all about the call to the void, and it is dark. It is dark. I'm using an alternate cover for this, but if you Google the cover, you will see some of the elements of darkness. It really captures that early internet feel of finding something you really aren't supposed to, and how it can really alter your view of reality as you at that point understand it. And hoifada. Very, very good. My first Todd Kessling novel. It will not be my last. And lastly, but again, not leastly, I love all these, is Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. This was such a unique version of a possession story. So well told. Such great characters. And it just really it takes one of the things that I like least about possession stories is that they usually ratify the teachings of the church, where this one takes a very different view, and a very different view culturally and philosophically than most, possession stories. So that's why this one just, chef's kiss. V. Castro is super dependable. Next up is my favorite characters. So there are quite a few characters that I love this year. So let's go through some of them. Owen, who is the titular creature, he's the titular dweller in the book Dweller. And he is not a monster, he is very much a character, because there's more going on with that character as the book goes on, and he understands a lot more than you would think. So I just thought he was just a magnificent character, and there's a lot of complexity to him. The entirety of the Maleficent Seven. Yes, all seven. It's like seven of the biggest bastards who have ever existed having to team up to stop a different bastard, which is basically the church. And every character of the Maleficent Seven was so well told and so well executed. I loved them all. And Hall from Just Like Magic. This book destroyed me emotionally. I still have not recovered. It was a beautiful book. It's a wonderful book. In romances, I never like the male characters. They just bore me. I don't like talking to men normally, so I guess that's it. But Hall is just like a genuinely sweet, loving, awesome character from Just Like Magic. He is a holiday spirit, goes by the name of Hall. And he has stuff to him, like, because it starts where it's like a high concept romantic comedy where it's like, what if you had like basically like the genie from Aladdin as your boyfriend going into Christmas who can do anything for you. And then it grows into being this really compelling, meaningful, layered romance, and that's because like Hall as a character is very real, and in becoming human starts to care about things that he never cared about before, and he feel things that he never felt before, and it's just learning to be human. I don't know, it was just a really beautiful, wonderful story, and I think that Hall as a character is just so good. My favorite short story collections of the year. So we have Darkness Beckons, that was edited by Mark Morris. Tons of awesome authors who I hadn't encountered before, telling some really cool stories. Classic Monsters Unleashed. I love old school Universal Monsters books. This one a little long, but it was still very much a great time throughout, with some awesome stories and some awesome twists on various classic monsters. And You Like It Darker by old Stevie King. I think that this was a really, really strong collection from King. Probably his strongest that I've read in quite a bit. I really, really like this. I really like the novellas especially, but also some of the short stories were quite good. I like how various the perspectives are, and I like how the styles and tones can really shift as you go through the collection. And yeah, I just thought it was really, really special and cool, and I appreciated it. My favorite booktube events. So, Holiday Hill, which just happened. So it's probably like a little rosy feeling. But I had so much fun with this. Spearheaded by the great Kelsey from Slime and Slashes, the goat of goats. I don't know, bad, whatever. It was just so much fun and had such a great cast of people and just had a great array of people who were involved and who showed up to things, and just the audience really made this a super special thing. Then, of course, Old School April, always a classic, doesn't fail. Old School April, one of the greatest things invented by mankind ever. You know, everyone is like, oh, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Bitch, Old School April, better than sliced bread. Kelsey killed it again. And Garbagis by Criminale. I wasn't a host this year. I'll probably be back hosting next year. But I still participated a lot in this one and had a great time because it's Garbagist. It is garbage, but not in quality of event. Classics. My favorite classics. Yes, I did read a surprising amount of classics this year. My favorites were Jane Eyre. I love Jane Eyre. I thought it was amazing. I was really touched by the end. I thought it was a really great romance. And I was just like, oh my, I love this book. Ooh, all of my feels. Dr. Jekyll, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I thought this book is great in that it really doesn't specify what Mr. Hyde is doing, so you as a reader can read this at any time in your life and imagine the debaucheries of your time put on Mr. Hyde, and you could really feel how a lot of this book is about alcoholism, and yeah, it was just a really, really compelling read. And of course, Charles Dickens' The Christmas Carol. Even though I am still a Scrooge, this was a wonderful, wonderful book. Booktubers who made me spend the most money this year. Not surprising, some of this goes by the events. Criminale, 100%. Every year coming up to Garbagist, I spend the most money. Because I'm like, ooh, baby. It's coming. So I have to have a theme for Garbagist every year, and then I spend way too much money on the theme, and then I read all the books that I got, and I'm like, these books suck. Not Criminale's fault. It's my fault. Calcium, Slime, and Slashers. Always. 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 And not in a bad way. It's just she's like one of the few people who talk about like vintage books, and like vintage books are like what could cost money, like what I spend money on, because like you know, Kitty from Spicy Cats Reads, I read a lot of books because of her this year, but almost all of the books that I read for her were like available on Libby and available through like the library. Where, like, a lot of times when you talk about vintage horror and vintage reads, you can't get that without shelling out some buckies. And I don't regret it, but yeah, that's why Kelsey's on this list. And then Jordan Sorcery, who you probably never heard me talk about. I'm not going to at him in this, but I will leave a link to his channel. I bought so many things because of this man. He is by far the one who I spent the most money in. He talks a lot about old school tabletop games and focuses a lot on Warhammer Fantasy, and oh my lord, he talked about Dark Future, and that's when I bought all my Dark Future books. I bought a whole bunch of classic Warhammer Fantasy stuff. You know, it was a lot. There's a lot of stuff that I bought because of Jordan Sorcery, and I don't really regret it, but it was a lot of money that I spent. Best arcs. The Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming. I'm so glad I randomly picked up this book because I thought it sounded funny, and then I read it and I was like, oh crap, this book is amazing. I am so glad I picked it out for an arc. Just a really fun, really funny book. Everything that I talked about before, earlier, but now in about the actual book. Number 2, Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. I had not read any S.A. Barnes book before, and I really, really liked this. I found this a really moving and compelling book overall, and yeah, it was just a great time. Very solid sci-fi horror book. And next up, The Darkness Over Arkham, an Arkham Horror Investigators game book. So, this was great for many reasons. One, it was just fun to play. But 2, it brought on a whole new obsession with finding to track these books down and go and play a lot of these old vintage books that I'd never played before. Because I used to own a bunch of those, like, the game books that you know, that this is like a playoff of and an expansion of, but for Arkham Horror. But I never actually properly like got out the pen and paper and did all the dice rolls and stuff like that. Because I used to just do choose your own adventure styles, but I didn't actually do the fighting or anything like that. Where this, because I'm going to review it for an arc, I felt like I had to actually play the game. And when I did, it was so much fun. I actually went back and I bought a whole bunch of other books from that kind of similar line. And I've been having a great time with it. So yeah, this was really, really a book that brought to me a lot of joy because it opened up a whole new realm of things that I used to own, but I never actually played. And they're super fun to play, so had a great time with it. Best audiobook. The Legend of Drizzt, The Collected Stories. Oh my goodness. I don't want to just spend all of my time going over the narrators for this one, but there's reasons why it's on here is because of the narrators. You had like David Duchovny, you had frickin' Danny Pudi, you had Weird Al Yankovic, you had Ice-T. Like, there are so many people who read short stories that legitimately haven't read any other short stories or books through audiobooks, so it was just kind of like really a hoot. I would not say that my review of the entire book can be trusted because I did get so much joy out of just the various narrators, but I did find it a fun short story collection that made me excited to go back and read more of the Drizzt series, which I did after reading this, but really that audiobook was just mwah. Leather and Lark, my gorsh. Really, really good audiobook. Really, really good audiobook. The narrators they got to do the characters in this were spectacular. Like one of the best choices for narrators, bar none. Really, really brought the story to life. And I ended up liking it even more than Butcher and Blackbird. I'll talk about this book a little bit later. And then Spiderlight by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was actually read by the author, and I really liked the voices he gave all the characters, and especially the voice he gave to the main character of the book. Yeah, it was just really, really great book, and I think the strength of the audio being read by the author really helped you get into the space that he wanted you to for his writing. So I just thought it was a great book. Best trash, boobity boobity boob. Let's go hanging about in the trash pile. Chud Lives, the short story anthology based off of the movie Chud. I became unbearable after reading this for months, because I was just making Chud jokes for months. It was tons of fun to read, but it's mainly on here because I became a nightmare after reading it, as we all do in the best of trash. I'm sorry, but I'm actually not. Chud lives forever. Runes of Engagement. This was such a fun idea where it's basically like, what if we put a bunch of modern soldiers into a fantasy realm and they are cut off behind enemy lines of the fantasy world and have to figure out a way to solve all these problems in a fantasy world when they have all this modern tech and these modern sensibilities. And it was such a really fun, silly idea that was actually executed extremely well. So yeah, I really, really like this one. That was another arc. And the final arc, and also the final one in this entry, is The Dragon Kings of Oklahoma, a backwoods adventure. I did not expect to love this book as much as I did. It is basically like a book about like these people who are like smuggling dragons in the in the backwoods of Oklahoma, and I just thought it was really good because it's a book that's very fun and funny and silly, but it also has a lot of very cool, interesting characters and a lot of heart put into it. Some surprisingly really fun action sequences as well, and it also it has a lot of empathy towards people who are poor. Sometimes when you have people writing about the working class and people who are poor, especially in places like Oklahoma, Alabama, there's tends to be a lot of that's classism and just shitty treatment of the people who live there and who are caught in some of the epidemics, like the opioid epidemic and things like that, where this one actually dealt with it with a lot of heart and a lot of really good character writing, while also being a fun book. So it shows you can have fun, but you can also, have responsible fun and not laugh at people's misfortune just because, it's funny to you because you don't have to deal with it. So, empathy, comedy, and adventure. Novelizations and tie-ins, best ones are those. I read a lot of these guys. Boop, 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 boop. The Crow Lazarus Heart by Billy Martin. Oh my lord. I like this better than every other thing about The Crow. I don't hate The Crow. I think The Crow is a fine movie. I've never read the comic it's originally based off of. This was a novel tie-in, and I really only read it because I really like Billy Martin's writing, and did not disappoint. This book rocked. This book, was really hard to read and destroyed me emotionally, but when I say it rocked, I mean it was a very good book. It just destroyed me. It is very, very much a book that is still relevant, which is kind of sad because this was in the 90s. And yeah, it's just a lot of stuff that's still super duper relevant in today's society and actually has trans characters. And I don't know if I've read any books from this era that has trans representation. So yeah, it was really, really good. Really good and important book. The Shadow of Frankenstein. Not a book that is culturally important, but is a book that I love, because I love that original Universal Frankenstein series. This is a book that takes place between Bride of Frankenstein and Son of Frankenstein, and manages to do that so well. It captures the tones of both movies super duper well, sets up the stage, and tells a very captivating story that has a lot of great moments in it. This is basically Jack the Ripper comes back in London, and he has to fight off basically against the Frankenstein's monster. And they have this very interesting place where they put Frankenstein's monster in the realm of he is living with sex workers who are the ones who are predated on by Jack the Ripper mainly. So it puts him in a really interesting position. And yeah, I just thought it was a really, really good book that really felt like a universal Frankenstein. It didn't feel like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It felt like a book that took place specifically in the Universal horror movie line. And the Silent Night, Deadly Night novelization, which I had no idea was going to go this hard. It goes really hard. It is extreme horror, and it is very depressing, but I think it was extreme horror with a point. A lot of times I'm not a big fan of extreme horror, especially in the modern era, as I just feel like it's a lot of, man babies, and they're trying to be, as edgy as possible, but don't really have anything interesting to say. Whereas I thought this book really captured the vibe that the original Silent Night, Deadly Night movie was going for, and really, really was executed extremely, extremely well. Mwah. Really, really loved that book. Best Pet. Guinevere from the Legend of Drizzt series. It's a giant panther. As you can see, I like the little kitties. And this was a great cat. He's Guinevere. Guinevere is a magical cat. And he's got big claws. Anyways, I love Guinevere. Would die for Guinevere. The owl from the Alien book, Destroying Angels. This owl's dope. He's just a dope owl. I like owls, and I think they're dope. And also, I don't really want to talk about this one because it emotionally destroys me. Let's just say the dog from American Rapture. CJ Alidi, I have not forgiven you for that. I don't forgive you. I Don't Forgive You, but also 5 stars, an amazing book. But yeah, that dog was best dog ever, and I'm sad. Next up, best comic book or graphic novel, Where Monsters Lie. This was a madcap, zany book that was basically like, what if there was like a gated community for serial killers, and if the cops found out and tried to like bust in and take them down, and all hell broke loose. It is such a wild, inventive, silly, creative romp that I love. I don't know why I'm doing this. Kissing. Rogue Sons. This is just a really fun, original superhero tale that has a lot of cool characters, great art. It's all set in New Orleans, and it has like a very horror aspect to it. And I just thought the art was cool. I thought the story was cool, and yeah, I just really like the idea of like a modern horror superhero, and it was just executed really well. And this one, most of them I'm not ranking, but this one is by far my number one, and that is Spider-Man: The Life Story by Chip Zdarsky, which envisions what if Spider-Man originated in the 1960s, and then just as the decades went by, he aged with the decades. And it is really powerful, really interesting, really ties in a lot of very pivotal moments from Spider-Man history, and yeah, just a fantastic book overall. Best horror of the year. Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. I had no idea just how relevant this book would be. I remember when I was reading it, I loved it. I thought it was a great book. It was a 5-star even back when I originally read it. But I was like, I feel like this is about something that isn't as prevalent nowadays. And then the election happened, and a lot of places that were doing queer media just kind of decided it wasn't popular to do it anymore. Disney especially, they've canceled 2, episodes of 2 different television shows that were fully done and produced about trans characters, and they just cut it out, and it very much shows that Hollywood is not where I had stupidly thought it was in terms of representation and sticking by the queer community. And yeah, this book is more relevant than ever. And it is also just a fantastically written book, but it's a book that's really written with a point, and that point is extremely powerful. And this was an extremely moving story and was really, really just expertly told. Chuck Tingle is one of my favorite horror writers, and just a fantastic book. Dweller by Jeff Strand. Oh my god, I've talked about this before. This book emotionally destroyed me. One of the best written books that I've ever read. Just a truly captivating story about the life of a very, very flawed, very kind of scary dude who finds a monster in the woods. And they have a friendship, but he's also using the creature. And it's just so layered and so interesting, and there are points where you go, this character has a chance to do the right thing and finally be a good person, and, it's just really, really a tragic tale that really feels real and emotional and just blew me away. So yeah, Dweller was amazing. Brainworms by Alison Rumfitt. Hoy-bada doy-bada doy-bada. This is my second book that's a hoy-bada doy-bada doy-bada. I don't know how to speak about this book, but it's rad. It's rad. Look up trigger warnings. Look up trigger warnings. When I say rad, I also mean a book that will destroy you. It just destroys you. It just breaks you down to your component parts that destroys you. It's wild. It's blah, 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 blah. It's a hoy-bada-doy-bada story. Best fantasy. Don't worry, guys, we're nearing the end. Spiderlight by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Again, another book with just amazing characters, where there's a twist near the end that was so well done and executed so well that I was completely blown away by this book from start to finish. I've never heard anyone talk about this. I've loved every Adrian Tchaikovsky book I've read, but this is by far my favorite that I've read by him. Just an extremely interesting story about examining, fantasy tropes, but also examining your own life and thinking, like, what are things that you have culturally been bred to dislike, but maybe are not so bad. Like what in your culture is criminalized or said, or people go like they're bad, but is really just propaganda. And it was a really, really well told story that was super touching and really, really great. The Maleficent Seven and The Last Shield, another Cameron Johnson double. I have talked about Maleficent Seven quite a bit already, so I'm going to talk about The Last Shield here. This is basically like the pitch is like a fantasy Die Hard, but it's like so much more than that. Like it delivers on that premise super well, but it is basically like this woman who's like a Kingsguard. She finds herself in the line of duty becoming disabled, and while she's like trying to recover and comes to terms with her disability, like a bunch of people come in and kidnap the person she's been guarding for like her entire life, and that's where the diehard of it comes through. But there's that added element of like the fantasy world, but also she is disabled, and it was really good disability representation, really great action, really great characters. Everything in this book was done extremely, extremely well. Cameron Johnson can do no wrong. Best nonfiction. Predator, a memoir, a movie, an obsession. Who knew a book about the original Predator movie could be this touching? It's hard to explain why, but this book is just amazing. It's just amazing. Dungeons and Dragons, Art and Arcana, a visual history. So this goes through all of the history of Dungeons and Dragons and is specifically focused on the visual aspects that made up the hobby from the beginning, and was just like a great overview of Dungeons and Dragons in pop culture, and really, really worked. I really found this book compelling and was such a great read. So yeah, huge recommendation. Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Gender in the Modern Horror Film by Carol J. Clover. Now this is obviously written from the 80s and is examining a lot of 80s horror, but the ways that Carol J. Clover talks about these books, these movies, is, I think, timeless. And yeah, I just think this is a fantastic book, especially if you're like a dude who's watched these movies for a billion times and have never really thought about some of the more complexities in terms of gender representation in horror movies from this time period. Yeah, just a fantastic book. Favorite books that are released this year. Long Live Evil. Again, talked about this really early in the video. This is a book that is all about a person who is terminally ill, and she has the option to go into her favorite fantasy universe, but she has to play the villain, and she has a very specific goal that she has to reach before an end date, and if she does, she'll be allowed to live forever. And well, maybe not forever, but she will be cured of her illness and be able to live a full life. And that's a trope that normally I wouldn't like, but it's executed so well, and it's so interesting how she interacts with the world that she's put into and what it says about how we as culture villainize women in very specific ways, that I just thought it was a fantastic book. It was very fun, very exciting. I didn't even know this was a romantasy, really. There was a good romance in it, that was really cool, and I loved where it went, but I didn't think of this as I just thought this was a great fantasy novel. It's called romantasy, but I don't know how much I agree with that definition, because I just thought it was a wonderful fantasy novel. But yeah, this book just moved me in a variety of ways, and again, is kind of deconstructing how we view villains in our culture, which I think was just wonderful. The Witchstone by Hetty H. Neff. Oh my god, this book was amazing. Oh, this book was probably the funniest book I read all year. Basically, there is this Thale son who is in charge of various curses in hell. A new boss comes in and is basically like, you have not done anything your entire life. Your dad is completely fine with me killing you unless you actually manage to make some real suffering happen with your curse. So this guy who's this con man, Thale son, has to he joins this family who has this curse on them for generations, and the only way he can cause new pain and suffering is to get them very, very close to ending the curse and then taking that away from them at the last minute. So the entire book, are never really fully 100% sure where he's going to stand at the end. And what really makes the book work is that the characters who are being cursed feel very real and have these very deep emotional connections. And I just thought it was a fantastic book in that, like, it takes a very silly premise, but then puts it onto a layer of really, really well-told reality. Of course, it's not, like, the way the curse works is not realistic, but it's portrayed in a very, like, emotionally empathetic way that really makes it all work. And as we talked about earlier, Bury Your Gaze, which I think was just a magnificent novel. Favorite vintage reads? The Grave by Charles L. Grant. This was my first book in the Ox Run Dead series, and I thought it was really, really fun. I thought it was cool. It's a good book. It was basically like just a very thematic book about, spooky things happening in a small town. It wasn't anything like amazing, but I loved it. Live Girls by Ray Garton. First Ray Garton, won't be my last. My goodness. God goodness. Hoy bida doy bida doy bida, but in not a bad way, but just a saucy way. Spacecrafts 2000 to 2100 AD. This was a fictional book, obviously, but it is written like it's a textbook about the evolution of spacecraft through this lens. This was made in the 70s, I believe, and the art was really cool, and through the descriptions of these various spaceships that had awesome designs, it also told a story and built a world through these various entries into the spacecraft guides, which I just thought was a really cool idea and was just a super fun book to read. Best sci-fi, Echoes of Eternity. I've already talked about this, but Aaron Dembski bound and killed it again. And The Fall of Cadia, just an extremely emotional Warhammer book that just blew me away, and is a huge book, all about a very pivotal moment in the setting, and everything is done extremely well. I loved it. Thank you, Robert Rath, for gifting us another great book. Best romance. This is the last category. Can you hear my voice? It's going soon. It's going away. Rival vs. Vile. Oh my god. This is Kitty from Spicy Cats Read. She made me read this, and Leather and Lark, my other one that's right here. These books were very good in different ways. So let me talk about Rival vs. Vile. This is a cozy fantasy, queer romance in a cozy fantasy setting. And I just really love the characters. I really love the back and forth. I really like how they deal with the conflict in this book. And yeah, it was just really, really well told story about these two men who have competing potion shops right across the street from each other in this medieval town. And, it starts with them kind of having this rivalry, and then they slowly begin to form a relationship. And it's just really, really well done and really cute. Loved it. Leather and Lark, I've talked about this before, but both the audiobook was amazing. It has really, really compelling characters. Really thought the man character was actually interesting, which again has not happened much in, smut or romance novels for me personally. And yeah, just the smut levels happen mainly at the end. So for the most part, it's kind of a more slower burn romance, but I really love the way these two characters interact. And yeah, they're serial killers, but they seem fun. I trust them more than I would trust the characters from Butcher and Blackbird. Those two, I don't trust them. I don't want to hang out with them. It's a good book, but I don't want to hang out with them. These two, I trust them. They're cool. Okay, it's not cool to be serial killers. And finally, last but certainly not least, for the last time, I'm going to be saying that sentence. Just like magic. Oh my god, just like magic. Beautiful. I love this book. Again, another book that has a very silly premise, but then executes it extremely well and brings the reality of the situation to the forefront, which is what really makes it work. And yeah, still not emotionally recovered from this book. So, what books did you read that had a very significant impact on you? I would love to hear what you think. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.